Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Strategoi video. Ryan here with a continuation of the list building series that I began in 3rd edition, but now we're officially in 4th edition. And I'd like to welcome you guys because the last couple videos Jonas and I have done have either been previews for what's coming in 4th edition for a whole month and a half really, or stats based on those previews, or obviously Jonas's painting video and my all of my games that I played in 3rd edition video, which understandably has not been seen by a lot of people because there's more important news announcements coming out this week. So hopefully this video can be used as a reference for the future and not just as a kind of a news blip, as the rest of our videos have been more or less for the last month and a half. Today we're going to go over list building in general, understanding the new battle profiles system. So if you weren't keeping up, we had some announcements early on in the 4th edition news cycle that were talking about how you make regiments, how you write lists. And they were quite specific about the drops part of it and the regiments part, but they weren't very specific about exactly how all the bits and pieces of your army, your heroes, and the rest of the units go together to make these regiments. They gave some examples, but it was a little bit vague. And one big question a lot of us were asking is, are certain lists or certain units just going to be dead because they can't be taken at all by any heroes and therefore have to be auxiliary units? So anyway, we finally have the answer. And if you're keeping up with the releases that are coming out this week, the week of making this reference video, on Monday was the general rules, and including this battle profile section. And then Tuesday was order, all the order armies. Wednesday was chaos. Thursday is death, and Friday destruction, which is the normal order of the Grand Alliances we typically see. And so anyway, it's been just a flood of information, lots to process. It's going to be hard for us to get information out as fast as we want to, but fortunately, Jonas and I are pretty reinvigorated to be bringing you as much content as we possibly can. So thank you so much for all the support over the past month and a half, 2 months. All right, so let's get into this reference video. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about? I'm going to be covering the basics of the free-to-download battle profiles that we have, and then actually going into the battle profiles themselves, focusing first on heroes and then on the units, and then I'm going to break everything down into about 5 or so different army types based off of how complicated or not complicated, how flexible or not their battle profiles are. Okay, so let's dive in. So the basics. All right. This is just the information we've already seen, but for those of you that aren't on the same page, we can look at that image to the right to kind of get a visual reference for what I'm about to say. But you have heroes, right? And your heroes can lead, are basically the leaders. Each one is a leader of up to 5 regiments you can take. And we'll talk about why up to 5 in a minute. You have to have at least 1 regiment for the general's regiment. You have to have a general. It's the only real requirement we have anymore, other than like the exact composition of your army, but you could basically just do anything you like once you've got a general. That said, you won't have control over the drops and stuff, which is where we're going to go into shortly. Most regiments, so those by any hero that isn't your general, hold 3 extra units in addition to that hero. The general's regiment holds 4 extra units, and each regiment counts as a drop. And so if you don't know what drops are, when you're deploying, you and your opponent take turns putting down a certain portion of your army. Each regiment drops at the same time, though we now know you can choose to split it up if you want to, but then the whole regiment has to be split up into separate drops. So it's kind of all or nothing, but it's way more flexible than it once was. And so now you take turns doing that, and whoever finishes first gets more control over how the game flows at the beginning, basically. Okay, so let's move on. Now, so heroes, I've already covered that top part, so we're just adding some text down below. So any units that can't fit in regiments basically become new 1-unit regiments called auxiliary units. Now, they're not actually regiments, but they're a separate thing, an auxiliary thing, because it's just 1 unit. And I'm calling them new regiments basically because they are dropped together because they're by themselves and they count as a whole drop. So, and then the next point is if you have more auxiliaries than your opponent, they get +1 command point, so CP, per battle round. So that's 5 extra CPs over the course of a fully played out game. So they gave you an example here. If player 1 has the General's Regiment, they both have a General's Regiment, and then player 1 has 2 regular regiments, so that's a hero plus units that fit in that regiment, but then said, well, I've got an auxiliary unit I want to take because I just couldn't fit it in to take a unit in one of the other regiments, either because the regiments are full or because of the way that some heroes can allow you to take certain units. So I had to take an auxiliary unit. So I have a total of 4 drops, and one of those is an auxiliary. And the second player had 1 less regular regiment, but 2 more auxiliary regiments for a total of 5 drops. And so they're not only going to not outdrop, but let the other player outdrop them, which means they finish deploying first. But they're also, because they have more auxiliary units, they're giving a +1 command point per battle round to their opponent. So it's 2 kind of debuffs or things you wouldn't really want to give up. But we'll talk about more about that later. Okay, so the next thing that we have to talk about is what is the battle profiles sheet in general, okay? Because we're used to seeing all the profiles. I've got the Fire Slayer's example on here for both the heroes and units side. We're used to seeing this at the end of a battle tome, but GW is trying to separate these out now. So I said that this is a frequently updated document with all list building information, plus Regents of Renown, so it's going to be below this, and that's your new ally system. The Legends system, which always existed but now is a little bit more fleshed out, I suppose, is just units that got squatted out of the game and that you can use in casual games but not at official tournaments or prep for tournaments or whatever. Also, errata and FAQs. If you don't know, the difference is, errata is when they need to actually fix something. And I could have mentioned designer's commentary here too. That's kind of a third topic. But errata is when they change the actual text of something that's in the rules. FAQ is more like questions that people answer, and designer's commentary is more like letting people know the intent of a rule to get a better sense for why it was written. There's a subtle difference between some of those. Okay, so on these tables, we see the more reddish pinkish table there. That's the heroes table, and then we see the bluish units table. Per army, we see all legal units with unit size, points, and base size, plus other information. But those are the things we've come to know. Now, all units are split into heroes/units. Now, I'm separating because traditionally in Warhammer parlance, the way we talk about things, a unit was both heroes and all the units that come in sizes of like 5, 10, 3, 6, whatever. And now they seem to be separating into a hero is no longer a unit. Now, I don't know if that's true in the core rules, but in terms of at least the battle profiles pages here, the heroes are a separate concept from the units. You can think of it as like troop types or like your non-hero units in the game. Now, some heroes, often in italics, so, with like the little kind of cursive-y letters that are tilted to the side, if you're not familiar with what italics means in English, some of those heroes act like units themselves, but we'll cover that later. And each hero's profile lists how flexible their regiments can be under the regiment options selection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all of this in very specific detail so you can get kind of a hands-on way of figuring it out. Okay, so who can take what? I'm going to start with what I'm describing as quote-unquote a War Master type hero. The reason I put it in quotes here is because a War Master is actually a keyword, and it's on your War Scrolls for the guys that are usually named characters, with a few exceptions, and therefore unique, and that are, like kind of the big shots in the army. And the only real game distinction with War Master is that if you have any amount of War Masters in your army, one of them has to be your general. It doesn't matter which one, but any amount of War Masters, at least one of them has to be your general. So you could mix and match. It doesn't have to necessarily be the most expensive one or whatever. But the reason I'm calling them War Master type heroes is because often this ability that we're seeing, that I'm about to describe, is attached to that type of hero, like a kind of hero that can lead any version of your army. So I'm calling them War Master type heroes, and they can take any non-heroes you like. There's a couple things to break down here, but first let's start with the syntax. For those of you that like kind of computer programming type things, this is always going to look like any, And then and whenever you see the brackets here, it means fill in the blanks, a faction name. So if we look down at the Fire Slayers example down below, say the first line, Auric Flamekeeper, it says he can take any Fire Slayers. Obviously, the name of the faction is Fire Slayers. So what it means is you can take any combination, whether you're the general or not, by the way, in your regiment, that unit can take, if it's not the general, then 3 units, or if it is the general, then 4, of any Fire Slayers units you like. So if I go back to that last slide, so you can kind of see, that's the blue stuff. So you could take Auric Hearthguard, Hearthguard Berserkers, Volkite Berserkers, Vulcan Flame Seekers. You can take any combination of those you like up to the amount that you're allowed. Now, in the War Master description there, I said you can take any non-heroes you like. Now, we're going to get back to heroes, but it seems like when you say any Fire Slayers, you'd be like, well, a Fire Slayer, that's also any one of my heroes. But that's actually not how it works. Look at the Auric Runefather, for example, the second line. He has the any Fire Slayers keyword, but it also says he can only take 0 to 1 Grimnir's Chosen. Now, we'll talk about why, but this is another hero, essentially. And it's not saying he can take any combination of other heroes he wants, and then if he does take a Grimnir's Chosen, he can only take one of those. It's saying you can, it's the implied in this is you can never take any heroes unless it says specifically that you can take, in this case, 0 to 1 Grimnir's Chosen. We'll talk more about those later. But anyway, our example below is Fire Slayers because literally every hero, what a luxury, can take every single, is a War Master type as I'm describing it. They're not literally all War Masters on the War Scrolls, but they literally, if you look, every single one says any Fire Slayers. So that means as far as the blue units are, like the units, that you got full flexibility. Okay, let's move on. So here's another example of a War Master type faction. So Tzeentch has a more restrictive version of it, okay? So if you look down the list, these are all the heroes. The only ones that have access to any Disciples of Tzeentch, which of course is their faction name, are the 2 Lords of Change, so the named one, Kairos, and then the regular one, and the 2 Gaunt Summoners, one on disc, one on foot. Those are the only ones. Not the other heroes don't have that keyword. So if you need to take a unit that doesn't fit into one of the other descriptions that the other guys have, and you don't want to add auxiliary units, you are going to have to take one of these 4 hero types to be able to put it in that regiment. Okay, hopefully that's clear. All right, moving on to an unlimited type unit. So I was first talking about a hero, but I thought I would switch to units here because I wanted to say, well, if a War Master type is the kind of hero that can take any units they like, what about the other way around? Are there any units that can be taken by any, like literally all heroes? And that's harder to kind of figure out, but let's talk about it. Unlimited type units can be taken by any hero, okay? The syntax. There isn't really a syntax for this because you have to figure out by cross-referencing all the heroes and keywords. So for example, if we look down at Ideneth, if you scan all the heroes, every single, so the Namarti units, which there's 2, Namarti Thralls and Namarti Reavers, are either available to any hero with any Namarti, so that would be like the Thrall Master, the Soul Render, the Soul Scryer, the Tidecaster, or to the War Master types with any Ideneth Deepkin. So that would be the rest of your heroes, like the King, the Eidolons, and Lotan, okay? Oh, and Volturnos. So, implicitly, even though it's not written here on the sheet, you can take any Thrall, or you can take any amount of Thralls or Reavers that fit into the regiments of any of the heroes. You don't have to worry, hey, I want to take a bunch of Thralls. Do I have to be careful about which heroes I choose? No, not at all. You can do whatever you want. So I'm calling this an unlimited type unit. Now granted, all these names I'm giving, like War Master type, unlimited type, are not official GW terms, but it's something I'd like to see maybe catch on, or some other version of it, because you start to see trends when looking at these. I've looked at, I think, every single one of the battle profiles, at least briefly, if not extensively. And you start to see some recurring trends that aren't necessarily spelled out. That's why I'm making this video. All right. So guild type heroes are those that can take only certain types. So the syntax is any and then guild type. Fill in a guild type. So let's get an example. Tzeentch. You can that would be either any demon or any arcanite, which if you don't know is basically the Tzeentch version of immortal. So let's take a look. The Changecaster, the first line, can take any demon. The Curseling, however, the next line can take any Arcanite. We do have some, as we mentioned before, that can take any Disciples of Tzeentch, but you'll see that all the heroes are either any demon or any arcanite, plus some extra text, but that's not what we're focused on right now. So let's look at what that means if we look at the troops. So you can see here under relevant keywords next to all of our troops, our units, that in addition to things like infantry, beast, war machine, that kind of thing, cavalry, that's our troop, like kind of our function on the table. You're also seeing the keywords that have to do with what we just referenced. So like demon or arcanite. Now, important to note that the chaos spawn is just beast. It doesn't have demon or arcanite, which means if you were to take it, granted, I haven't read the full rules in this, and I know they've got a special summoning mechanic, but if you were to take it, the only 4 guys that could put it in their regiment without it causing an aux unit, unless I'm missing something else, would be the ones that say any Disciples of Tzeentch. But anyway, so basically those demon heroes get to bring their guild. I'm calling it a guild, which is like their little mini faction, if you will. So basically the demon side of the faction of Tzeentch. And the arcanite, the mortal heroes, are bringing the arcanite or mortal units. Seems pretty logical, right? Okay, so now we got power pair type heroes. These are the ones that specify units on an even more granular level, usually just saying unit name. So for example, this is the Sylvaneth list. Arch Revenant, the second line there, can take, in addition to any Kurnothi, which of course is a type of unit, but there are 3 different versions of Kurnoth Hunters, so I thought maybe that wasn't as specific as I wanted, but that's another example. Any Gossamed archers. Like, it literally lists them by name instead of saying some keyword that applies to more than just Gossamed archers, or by saying some kind of function like infantry or cavalry or whatever. So there's an example of a troop type that gets named literally in bold text there. So that's kind of interesting. All right. Restricted units can only be taken 0 to 1 times per hero. So the syntax would be 0 to 1 and then the unit's name. So in a Skaven example here, clan rats. I find this really weird, but you also see it with the Warcry Warband in Lumineth, the Riverblades. I don't know how to pronounce the first name of the thing, but the Riverblades, where it's 0 to 1 for specific things. So even though you'd think clan rats can kind of come along with anyone, they're accessible to every unit here, but unlike what we see in Lumineth with Wardens, where Wardens can be taken by literally every hero, Clan Rats can only be taken 0 to 1 per every hero, meaning the Wardens could have been, say, the hero plus 3 units of Wardens, but a lot of these heroes can only be that hero plus 1 unit of Clan Rats. Kind of interesting. But the exception, if you were really zooming into the rules here, is that any Skaven, of course, could take more, and any Verminous, because Clan Rats are also Verminous. So the Claw Lords there, the second and third entries, would be able to take any amount of Clan Rats. Okay, so there's an example. All right, Italics heroes. So finally we're on to the Italics heroes. Can either lead their own regiments or be added to another hero's regiment. The syntax is 0 to 1, and then it's going to always say in italics, new italicized name under the notes column. What do I mean? Well, this is OBR, so let's go look at the Liege Cavallos. That's our 4th line there. Now, you see in his regiment options, it says he can take any Osiarch Bone Reapers. Okay, cool. So he's a War Master type himself, but if we look at the notes, it says this hero can join an eligible regiment as a Legion sub-commander. So what they've done is redefined who he is. He is a new keyword. This has never been seen before, a Legion sub-commander. And now we're going to reference that italicized text in some of the other heroes' regiment options. So if you look at Archon, the second line there says 0 to 1 Legion sub-commander. You might be thinking, well, why doesn't it just say 0 to 1 Liege Cavallos? And we're going to see why in a second. But let's look at who else can take him. So it's basically Archon, it's Katakros, it's Nagash, and it's Vokmorshin. So basically, kind of like, sorry, not Vokmorshin, I take that back. It's just the 3 big bads of the faction. And of course, Nagash is with all factions, all death factions. So it's kind of like the big dudes, and probably that actually have the War Master keyword. I haven't looked at all their War Scrolls to know for a fact, but that's probably the case. That's not always how it works with these italicized heroes, but that's how it works in this case at least. And then you can kind of remember, oh yeah, the big guys can take this guy. Now what does that mean? So if you take Katakros in your list, he counts as the hero, and because he's a War Master, he's probably going to be your general, but if you had Archon, you could choose for him to be in a smaller regiment if you want. But Katakros, let's say he's got 3 units, and you chose to use this ability to put the Liege Cavallos in his regiment. So it would be Katakros and the Liege Cavallos, and then you'd have 3 slots left, assuming he's your general, because you normally have 4 slots, and the Liege Kavalos eats one of those slots up. Okay, so it's basically like in Cities of Sigmar in the second edition book, we used to refer to it as his retinue, his adjutant, the kind of like his side man, the guy that's helping him out all the time. It's kind of interesting, and thus sub commander. Let's take a look at another example. So here's another one where we're looking at the Gits, where both the Loon Boss on foot and Rabble Rouser have been defined as a Moon Clan agitator. Now let's take a look at their notes. So if you look at Loon Boss, that's the 4th line. It says he can be taken, the same wording here, but as a Moon Clan agitator. And we see the same thing for Rabble Rouser, which means the reason they came up with these new italicized names is so that they can lump more than one hero into that name, and then when they reference it later, so like if we look at the Fungoid Cave Shaman, the second entry there, it says they can take 0 to 1 Moon Clan Agitator. It means you can't take one of each. You can pick one of the two, and you can put that guy in the Fungoid Cave Shaman's regiment. And you might say, well, let's go back to OBR. Why did they need to do that here? Well, maybe they're going to expand the list later, and they want to eventually add more potential Legion sub-commanders for the future, but they don't want to change this whole system. So if they had said his name in particular, like it's for Archon, if it said 0 to 1 Liege Kavalos, and then they change the system, then they need to go and change that. Whereas if they want to add another hero that is going to be a Legion subcommander, all they got to do is in his notes column add Legion subcommander in there. Okay, so here's the Gits example again, and as you can see, those 2 Moon Clan agitators can be taken by, if you kind of scan the list and figure out who qualifies, it's basically all the other Moon Clan heroes. Okay? And again, you'll notice Skragrott can take any Moon Clan agitator, which is kind of interesting. He's an exception here. I'm just now catching that, which means he can take as many of them as he wants up to his, count, right? It doesn't say 0 to 1, so that's a unique one right there. And then he can also take any Gloomspite Gits, which means, of course, non-heroes, except for these Moon Clan agitators. Okay, so another example. So this is Tzeentch this time. There are 2 versions of the italicized names. One is a demon version, so if you that's called the Tzeentchian Deceiver, so that would be the change caster on the first line, or if you go all the way to the bottom, the second to last line, the changeling, who's unique if I'm not mistaken, that's also a Tzeentchian Deceiver. He was definitely unique before, but I haven't looked at the War Scroll recently, the new one. And then that's one category, and then you got the Arcanite. An Arcanite version, which is the Arcanite Kabbalist. So if you look at the notes column for the Curseling, the second line, he's an Arcanite Kabbalist, and then the Magister somewhere in the middle there is also an Arcanite Kabbalist. So now we have 2 different categories, and both category has 2 different options. So if you look at like the Fate Skimmer, the third line, it says 0 to 1 Tzeentchian Deceiver. So that means he can take either a Changecaster or the Changeling in his regiment, but not both. And then you see like the Arcanite, where's the Arcanite Kabbalist? That's for the Magister on disc or Zongor Shaman, so basically the 2 heroes on disc that are mortals. They can both take one Arcanite Kabbalist, so that means they can take either a Curseling or Ogre Thaumaturge, so kind of cool. Okay. Bold heroes. So this is kind of getting away from that, but it's kind of a similar idea, and it kind of goes back to what you might have been asking about the Liege Kavalos. So a bold hero doesn't get a new italicized category, and they get to function independently. So here we've got the syntax is 0 to 1 hero name, and it's also mentioned in notes for the heroes. Well, what do I mean? Let's take a look. We're looking at ogres here, and the Frost Lords can take 0 to 1 Icebrow Hunter. So if you look at the 2 Frost Lords kind of in the middle there, the one on Stonehorn and the one on Thundertusk, they both say they can take 0 to 1 unit name Icebrow Hunter. So they haven't bothered to name the Icebrow Hunter one of these keywords. And then if you look at the Icebrow Hunter, he can take any Beastclaw Raiders. But it's worth pointing out, if he's taken in the regiment, it's not his regiment anymore, so he doesn't get to bring any Beastclaw Raiders along with him, if that makes sense. I should have said this earlier, if one of these italicized or bolded heroes gets put into another hero's regiment, they don't get to be the leader of that regiment, and therefore they don't get to add their regiment flexibility into that unit. But anyway, so the Icebrow Hunter says this hero can join a Frostlord on Stonehorde or Frostlord on Thundertusk's regiment. It's kind of interesting. I don't exactly know why they did it this way instead of giving them one of the italicized names, but there you have it. So maybe that's the question to ask GW. Okay. Now, a word on the units themselves, because I've been talking about basically the heroes and who they can bring. So this is just something we've already known, but I want to just make it clear, since this is in fact a reference video. Units with a unit size of 1 can never be reinforced, even if in 3rd edition they used to be able to. So for example, the Burning Chariot down below, if I'm not mistaken, did not have the single keyword in 3rd edition. Or for example, I can say definitively a Alapex unit is unit size 1 and you could double up, right? But now that didn't mean that a lot of people would do it, but sometimes, like with Alapexes, it was a thing you might want to do. So that when you use an all-out attack, all-out defense, it applies to both. And so you get some extra value out of that 1 CP or buff otherwise. Now, so if it says unit size 1, you cannot reinforce it anymore. That's just gone, okay? So that's kind of a bummer, but it just is how the game works now, all right? It's as if it says single in the old way of working in 3rd edition, okay? Now, units with a unit size of 2 or more can be single reinforced, so 2 times their normal size. Why? So you had your normal size, and then a single reinforced means you add that size into it 1 more time, so that's doubling their size. But they can never be double reinforced, which means triple their normal size, because that was just a 3rd edition thing, so that's gone. If you have a unit of, say, 10 Kyric Acolytes down here, then they can only go up to 20 max. That's it. Okay. Warcry type units can never be reinforced and will say so under notes. Now, there could be a Warcry unit somewhere in one of these battle profiles that can be reinforced, but thus far, every time I've seen a Warcry unit, so in this case, Jade Obelisk, which you can super quickly find by looking at notes, because it's the only one that has anything written in notes, this unit cannot be reinforced. This is actually great for a couple reasons, because first off, if you are a Warcry fan, obviously, having 1 copy of this unit, no problem. You're going to get to play it in Warcry, assuming they don't take them out of the game. But it's also worth noting, GW just squatted a shit ton of Slaves to Darkness Warcry units out of Age of Sigmar, and I don't know what's going to happen to them in Warcry, but at least in Age of Sigmar. So I would buy with caution, even with, like, Jade Obelisk is newer than those old Slaves to Darkness ones, like Iron Golems. But I would be wary about buying too many of these because there's a really good chance they could squat them too as they kind of phase out of Warcry. So be careful about those. That said, having 1 is probably going to last for the whole edition, and you're going to have fun. I think so. My point is the reason they're not reinforceable is partly because they made the unit to not reinforce. Like sometimes they get kind of wonky and broken when they have like repeats of all their elite stuff and their champ type units and all kinds of weird stuff, especially Feck. I'm looking at you, but also I think it's kind of GW's weird way of trying to encourage you not to get greedy with them and then try to have a million of them. I think a lot of those units are going to function as more like they have diminishing returns if you bring more than 1 unit, but that might not be true with all of them. Anyway, that's a Warcry type unit. And then my last point here is not all relevant keywords go referenced in the heroes list. What do I mean by that? Well, so this is Tzeentch down below, and they say relevant keywords, but actually a lot of these keywords have nothing to do with the battle profiles for the heroes above. So for example, let's look at that real quick. Here's the Tzeentch again. You'll see that things that get referenced are any demon, Arcanite, demon, Disciples of Tzeentch, Arcanite, 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 demon, Arcanite, and then of course the italics things. But we've got a whole bunch of relevant keywords here that never get mentioned, like infantry, war machine, beast, cavalry. Yeah, none of them get referenced. Now, they do have an in-game function, don't get me wrong, but in the battle profiles, at least at the time of writing, they don't do anything. So it's kind of interesting they chose to include those, but, you know, it is what it is. I don't find it to be a problem, but it's just good to know that not every relevant keyword is going to be mentioned somewhere else in the battle profiles. Yeah, so there we go. Okay, so let's move on to talking about drops and auxiliary units considerations. Is it worth it? Jonas and I talked about this extensively in our first bit of coverage of the GHB, where we talked about the season rules and battle tactics. But I'm going to kind of reiterate some of that here in the context of this reference video. Okay, first, drops have always been a crucial consideration. Less is more. By finishing your drop sequence earlier, your deployment sequence earlier, you have more control over who goes first, and that can really set you up for a good double turn. Granted, the double turn's been nerfed a bit with the not being able to take a battle tactic if you actively choose to take a double turn. But still, it's still a very strong mechanic in the game, and so getting to know who goes first, or say like you want to be within range, you know they've got a melee army, you've got a shooting army, you want them to move closer to you on that turn. You don't want them to make you go first and then waste your whole first turn, especially with reduced shooting range in the game. So drops are important. Second point, complicated. This whole thing gets complicated with the battle tactic Slay the Entourage, where you have to kill a unit that's in the general's regiment, and the GHB, the current GHB's priority target honor guard ability, where you get to make your honor guard have +1 to hit and wound against all the units in your opponent's general's regiment. So, meaning you're talking about this balance between drops and auxiliary units considerations, and as Jonas and I already talked about, putting too many eggs in that one basket, so to speak, in your general's regiment can have some bad knock-on effects for making an easier battle tactic, or for giving them a priority target that makes a whole lot of sense. Lots of priority targets for that one unit in their own honor guard that implicitly is in their own general's regiment. So there's a push and pull dynamic here. Okay, auxiliary units might be necessary for spam lists, for example, Aug Magmadroths, which I'll talk about in a second, but run the risk of giving the opponent an extra CP every battle round. Okay, so if you find yourself wanting to take a combination of heroes and units where you're either full up on your regiments and maybe because you wanted to have low drops, so you filled them to the brim, but now you've got that one extra unit that you've got too many points left over, you need that one extra unit, it doesn't fit, and in any case, you need to take it as an aux unit. If it's a hero, you can take it as another regiment unto itself, so it could be a hero by itself in a regiment, which is totally fine. It would raise your drops by 1 without giving you aux units, but there are going to be some situations where you have a list build in mind where, because a certain hero and regiment option situation and combination doesn't exist, you're going to be stuck left with an auxiliary unit. So let's look at the Oops All Magmadroth list. So we're looking at all the ones that say on Magmadroth under the heroes' names there. So you can quickly find them by just seeing that's a longer line. So we got a Runefather, Runesmiter, and Runeson. If I'm not mistaken, you can mathematically take 6 of these in your 2,000 points list. However, none of them are italicized heroes. Back in 3rd edition, the Fireslayer's Battle Tome made it possible in, I believe, Lofnir, I want to say, is the Magmadroth subfaction, where the Runeson became battle line, and therefore he didn't count to your leader's count or your behemoth's count. You could take as many of them as you wanted, and it fulfilled your battle line condition. Of course, all that's gone, the behemoth limits and the battle line conditions and all that stuff, but there are all 6 of these. If you took 2 of each, 2 Runefathers, 2 Runesmiters, 2 Runesons, all on Magmadroth, that's 6 drops, because none of them can go in each other's regiments. And as far as I'm aware, there's nothing in the rules right now, the index, that says that you can skim it down. So you are talking implicitly about 6 separate drops, 5 of which are regiments and 1 of which is an auxiliary, which means you all of a sudden, not only do you have a lot of drops compared to a lot of armies out there, but you all of a sudden have 1 auxiliary, which means if your opponent didn't take at least 1 auxiliary unit, you're giving them an extra CP. If they do take exactly 1, then it's like neither of you did. And if they take more than you, which probably isn't going to happen unless you're playing against some just fun meme lists, then you would actually get the CP. But I would never count on it. I would never count on it even if you had no auxiliary units. So why would you with 1? So that's kind of a bummer that happened. But say you really the only reason you own Fireslayers is to take Magmadroths. I'd say just screw it. Have a good time. Just be okay with the idea that your opponent is working with 1 extra CP every battle round. Maybe the way you solve that is to make sure you're always the underdog every turn so that you get an extra CP in those battle rounds too. So that's what I'm thinking. But anyway. Okay, my last point is Hero Hammer is possible, okay? but maxes out at 10 times heroes with italics heroes included before hitting aux units. What do I mean by this? This is a weird sentence. In the current version of 4th edition, the way it works, as in contrast to 3rd edition, you could not take in 3rd edition an all-hero list unless they somehow became battle line, like I just said with Magmadroths, with the Rune Sons. Now, you have to have one general that has his own regiment, but there's nothing else. There's no other restriction. If you literally want to just take foot heroes that cost 100 points each, let's say your general is 100 points foot hero, and you want to take 20 100-point foot heroes, and that is your list, there is nothing stopping you from doing it. You would have 5 regiments and 15 auxiliary units, which means you would almost certainly be giving someone an extra CP. Of course, it doesn't get any worse than 1 extra CP per battle round. It's not like it counts how many more you have. It just checks to see that it's more. You can do Hero Hammer. Now, if you don't want to add auxiliary units, which is going to be my assumption when making list building videos from now on, that you don't ever want to have an auxiliary unit in your list, unless you absolutely have to, then you're going to cap out at 10 heroes for your Hero Hammer, which is half as many heroes. Not bad, still a lot of heroes. And it might actually be a viable list. There was a Doomseeker and Grimwrath Berserker list that was going around for Fire Slayers before. Especially when they used to each hero used to get +1 wound, and you could take like 3 artifacts or whatever it was. Now, the reason I mentioned those 2 units, the Doomseeker and Grimwrath Berserker, is because before they were heroes, but they did not have the leader troop type, which meant that there was no cap on how many of them you could take. You needed a general, you needed some battle line, 3 battle line units, and you could take as many of those guys as you wanted. And they did count as heroes for like heroic actions and stuff. But they didn't add to your 6 cap of leaders that you could take. Now you can still do it, but not without running the auxiliary risk. Now you'll see that these are the 2 units that also just happen to be Grimnir's Chosen. So what does that mean? They have that italicized keyword, and then we're looking at the units that can take them. So that'd be the Auric Rune Fathers, the Rune Master, the Rune, not the Rune Smiters, and then the Rune Sons. So basically any combination of Rune Sons, Rune Fathers on Magmadroth or on foot, plus the Rune Master can take a Doomseeker, a single Doomseeker or Grimwrath Berserker in their regiment. Which means without going over 5 regiments, you would have 5 heroes plus any combination of 5 Doomseekers or Grimwrath Berserkers that you want. Whether that's a good list, I don't know. But there you go. You have a list. And I don't even know if you can make that points-wise. You should be able to with the on-foot versions at least. Maybe not the Magmadroths. But still, there is a limit before you hit that aux cap. And that's where the question, is it worth it, actually kicking in. Plus, you might have a hard time taking objectives and doing whatever. But at least you can play a meme list without giving someone a CP. All right, let's move on. This is also another example. The last point I wanted to make here is that some former non-heroes are now heroes. So tree lords. I would say the situation with what was it called? The Heartwood? No. Oakenbrow. Oakenbrow list was the tree lords don't bracket. All 3 tree lord variants don't bracket until they get to their last wound in the 3rd edition book. Really cool. It enabled a really cool list, partly developed by one of my buddies, Mitchell de Boer, here in the Netherlands. But anyway, if you look, the Tree Lord, who used to just be a behemoth, again, behemoths are gone, but there's a version of reality where, like the Leviathan in Ideneth that gets put down in the units, the blue section, that get put into heroes' regiments, the Tree Lord is not. The Tree Lord is now a hero, which kind of makes sense. He's a lord of trees. He's not just a basic bitch tree int guy. He's like a Tree Lord himself. And he can take any Sylvaneth, so he's basically got kind of a War Mastery kind of function. But a lot of these heroes do. But he's also a Forest Sentinel, which means, if you scan the list, that the 2 other Tree Lords, so that's Spirit of Durthu and Tree Lord Ancient, plus Alariel, can take 1 Tree Lord in their regiment without, you get to take an extra one. So if you want to go all Tree Lords, you could do Spirit of Durthu, Tree Lord Ancient, and each one of those can take a Tree Lord Ancient with them. So you're only at 2 regiments at that point. And you could keep taking more. I don't know. I haven't done the points. You probably can fit about 5 or 6 of these guys in there. And you could go all trees, but you can only take 1 Tree Lord per each one of those heroes. So you're implicitly If you don't want to take anything that isn't a Tree Lord variant, you're implicitly, I think, at 3 drops minimum, because you needed to take to spend 2,000 points worth. I don't think 4. So taking 1 Spirited Durthu, 1 Tree Lord Ancient, and then 1 regular Tree Lord per each one of those. I don't think that hits the 2,000 points mark. So then you'd have to do more, which means that now you're kind of debating your drop situation, and that could be a problem. I don't think you're going to hit the Ox limit there, but you will have more drops than maybe you otherwise would like. Okay. So this is my next and closing segment here. Thanks for everyone for paying attention. Hopefully you're finding this useful. So the types of armies with respect to profiles. That's what WRT means. So I've grouped them, all the armies I could, into groups based off of my initial impressions. So super flexible. Fyreslayers and Sylvaneth are basically, you can take anything you want with any heroes pretty much, except the all Magmadroth's Tree Lords list, as I just laid out, is a little complicated. KO has lots of flexibility with Sky Vessels, so the boats, and their infantry, which is including the balloon guys. They're not cavalry. But each one of the boats has a transport capacity limit that I really think is going to be a problem for the list. So that's kind of implicit in the list building, because you need to think about how you're going to get your 4-inch moving foot troops around. Because, say, like a gun hauler can only take 1 unit with it, and can only take a unit of 5 guys, which means if you want to take a hero, you're wasting 4 slots basically. Or if you want to take a unit and a hero, a gun hauler just can't do it. Or you look at the frigate; it can take 2 units up to 12 model count. But that means that if you want to take a hero within every single boat you take, first off, the gun, along with the unit, the gun hauler just can't do it at all. And then the frigate can only take, like, let's say 10 Thunderers or 6 Sky Wardens or Engine Riggers at most, and then 1 hero. And that's all that's in that boat. So I'm a little worried about how the heroes are getting around. Yes, the Ironclad has a great engine work that lets it take it plenty. But even then, you can't fit that many Ironclads in the list at 500 points. So there's a part of me that thinks that's going to be the actual real list writing thing, but otherwise they're super flexible. So maybe I should have put a caveat there. Nighthaunt is super flexible and even allows for black coach spam, because the black coaches are, for many heroes, a 0 to 1 option, which is pretty cool. So you can just, I guess you could say I could have taken black coaches, an unlimited amount of them, but in 3rd edition you couldn't, of course. And then, if they were a regular unit, they wouldn't be restricted. But there's still, even with black coaches, reasonable restriction on it that's still kind of cool. Whether that's actually legitimate, I don't know, but it would definitely look great on the table. Soulblight and Cruel Boys are basically War Master of the faction, meaning almost every unit in those armies, with a few exceptions, can literally take anything. And I think it's really flavorful, especially for Soulblight, because you think about it, what do? They are literally Grave Lords. The whole thing, all of them are basically good at commanding undead things. And so even the lowly Necromancer can take everyone. The White King can't, but he's like only Death Rattle, I think, the 2 versions of White Kings, and watch Captain Hallgrim or whatever. But for the most part, that's true. And then I also said it's basically plus Cursed City for Soulblight. They made like their Italicized heroes, the Virkos heroes, out of what either that were literally in Cursed City or should have been if Cursed City like kept having expansion boxes the way it was supposed to, like Annika and Kritza and all those guys. Even Belladama, I think, was meant for Cursed City. They basically can all take like extra Cursed City guys in their regiments. So basically, if you want to go all Virkos, you're golden. And then Iron Jaws has a lot of flexibility, and it even has a great all cavalry / monsters option, especially with big pigs and the Maw Crushes and the Gore Gruntas. Really cool. And then Sons of Behemoth, extremely flexible. That said, I think they have a minimum of 2 drops, because you can take them as, like, I forget what the name was, but something like, it was a funny name, that you can make another one of the megas fit into the regiment of another mega. So anyway, all right, let's move on to the next type. Simple but split. What do I mean? Well, Daughters of Cain, this will be real quick. Daughters of Cain is basically regular elves, so the ones that can walk around in the street in the world of the Order people, like Witch Elf Sisters of Slaughter, with their, yes, with over-the-knee boots, but still they're walking around in the streets, versus the deformed ones that Marathi was afraid to let people see, even of herself, which were the Kinnerai and Melusai. And they also have a new option for basically avatar spam. Fun fact, Marathi is the only one that can take all units, so they're kind of split, that's what I mean. So she could take, she counts as one of her own things in her own regiment if she's the leader, which she has to be because she's the War Master, I guess. And then that means she has 3 other units. She could take 3 avatars, plus for every other hero you can take an avatar. So you could kind of like go full avatar on this. Kind of cool. Ideneth is Namarti versus the rest, as we've already seen. Chaos Gods, basically all 4 of them, some more complicated than others, but is basically demons versus mortals. OBR is basically infantry versus the rest, so like the catapults, the Gothazar Harvesters, and the Cavallos Death Riders, if I'm not mistaken, that's it, are the ones that are separated out. Oh no, the big boys might be different too. I'm not sure. The Morghast, but I'd have to check. And then Maw Tribes is, of course, split into Gutbusters and Beastclaw. Okay, so relatively complicated. We're going to be talking about this at length real soon, but Lumineth Realm Lords are basically real segmented. You've got Wardens being an unlimited unit that can be taken by everyone. You've got River Blades that are 0 to 1 for some weird reason in a lot of options. You've got a lot of guys that can either do Venari or Huracan or Alarith, of course, but then you've got like Blade Lords can come along with the Sonari. It's trying to kind of keep the same flavor that was going with the old book. Lyria Uthral is Emetrica in the sense that he can take Alarith as well. It's kind of weird. It's very flavorful, but it's very specific. More than most armies. Seraphon is also very detailed. It's kind of split into the monsters, not monsters, but there's a lot of weird restrictions. Like the Pterodon Riders can be taken like in a unit of 2 instead of 3. You see that in some other places in the army. I think Flesh Eaters has that as well. That's my next army here. Serfs versus Knights. Sometimes you see like 0 to 1 Serf, but unlimited Knights, or the other way around. Some weird exceptions. Skaven, God, I have so many comments about Skaven. Feels like half the army's missing, because there's not a lot of Pestilence anymore, and there's not a lot of Eshin, but I fully expect when the Battle Tome comes out to be seeing a lot more of that get fleshed out, so that's probably why. Some of the heroes work with the Vermin Lords, and some their respective Vermin Lords, like the Deathmaster works with the Eshin one, but like some just don't get mentioned at all. The weapon teams are still around. I can't believe it. Like for a whole edition, I suppose. The metal models, they're still in the game. That's just a side note, I guess. And then Clan Rats are 0 to 1, as we already talked about. I thought that was really weird. Okay, and then this is, I got 2 more slides here. Oh no, this is the last one, sorry. Super segmented. Cities of Sigmar is still quote-unquote racist. I hate throwing that word around too casually, but that's kind of what we've jokingly been calling it. Between humans, Dwarven, and elves, they did make the battle traits less so, where more of the things, like they get extra buffs if they are that race, but everyone can receive the same orders. But otherwise, they're very segmented, and it's kind of a bummer. Gits obviously have a strong divide between Moon Clan, not necessarily Squigs, but kind of, Trogs, and Spiderfang. Okay, on to our next category. Too long didn't read. TLDR, Stormcast Eternals. God, it's just such a long thing, and I didn't want to put it on screen. Half of it's getting squatted anyway, or like a third of it, the Sacrosanct stuff, in like a year, but at least you can still use it. And some of it actually looks like it's got some potential. And it's even though half of it's getting squatted, whatever, there's still a lot to process. Slaves to Darkness is basically the Stormcast of Chaos. And the recent Dark Oath expansion feels kind of like a mini faction. It's got all these like little exceptions. And there's lots of 0 to 1s on a lot of the heroes. Plus, of course, you've got all the Marks of Chaos, which gets even more complicated. But I don't think that had anything to do with the battle profiles, per se. And then, nice to know you. Sorry to the Beasts and Bone Splitters players out there. Beasts, obviously both of these are going away at the same time Sacrosanct for Stormcast goes away in a year's time. But you can still legally play with them for a year. Beasts of Chaos, basically do what you want until you rebase everything, not because, they've got a lot of flexible options, but, it's kind of more of a hand gesture to say, thanks for playing the game. See you in Old World. And Bone Splitters, I said, you mean Wargog Prophet, the faction? Because that's basically what almost anyone that used Bone Splitters used to use. I don't know really anyone that plays Bone Splitters except for that one model and then my buddy Kai, who kind of famously played a relatively successfully a all Big Stabba's army. Okay, so that's it, guys. I hope this reference was good for you guys. I had a blast making it. I'd like to think it could be the most comprehensive version of this that's online. So if you enjoyed it and found it useful, please spread it around to some other sites and clubs and whatever you're a part of, Discords and such. That goes without saying for anything. We just appreciate you guys spreading the word. But as you know, this is going to be a very competitive season as a content creator for Warhammer, for Age of Sigmar stuff, because the floodgates are open and so much is coming out. So thank you for your support and for us during this time. Of course, you don't have to just listen to us, by no means. I listen to multiple channels. But we really appreciate you guys helping keeping the momentum going. So thank you so much. Anyway, I've got the Lumineth slide up here because guess what? Our next set of videos is going to be Jonas, myself, and Siegfried covering, once again, Lumineth content first, because our channel was originally a Lumineth channel, and I'm really excited to talk about it because I'm actually pretty hyped about Lumineth. And I know Siegfried and Jonas are as well. All right, guys, until next time, Ryan out.